welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're gonna make such a big bag. We're gonna make a bag that is so big and it can hold everything, and it's gonna be perfect for travel, and I think it's gonna be your new favorite bag. Hopefully it is. Today, we're gonna make the Wish Tote, and this is a pattern by me, OklaRoots. Now, this is a big bag. It's a big tote bag. And let me just tell you the history behind the design of this pattern. I was going on a cruise earlier this year, and I needed to bring my laptop and a bunch of work and a whole bunch of things, and I just couldn't find the type of bag I was looking for. I ended up buying a very, very expensive designer bag, which I love and I cherish, and it worked great. But I'm honestly now too afraid to use it because it's just so fancy. I'm like, I just keep it like locked away. So I was thinking, I was like, you know what? I'm a bag maker. I shouldn't have to go down that route. So I came up with the exact bag that I needed. And this is a bag that I need a lot when I travel, especially for work. I need a bag that's gonna hold my laptop. It's gonna hold all my notebooks, my phone, my passport, everything I need, my wallet, all in one easy place. So let me just walk you through this. It is very basic on the outside. It has one large panel here. These are not rectangles, these are all trapezoids, so you will have to print out the pattern. I do have the measurements for like the length on the top and the bottom and the height, so if you want to do it on your own, you can, but I do suggest you print out the pattern pieces. We have these nice strap anchors here, so it makes this a very durable handle. I wanted to show you the side is so big, you could have a lot of fun. You could do some embroidery. I did some applique here. You could do a lot with how big these panels are, or you can just leave them on their own, or you can use a quilted material. I like to add a little bit of an accent to the sides and the bottom. Purse feet are optional. One thing that's so important for me when using a tote bag, and I've heard from so many of you agree, is a zipper. So I do have a recessed zipper gusset kind of thing on here. This is a nice wide zipper panel. Tote bags are great because they hold a lot of stuff, but then as soon as you set them down and then they fall over, everything falls out. And so we need a zipper, but the zipper doesn't go all the way to the edges, so you don't have to worry about the zipper being bulky in the seams. Open this up. Oh my gosh, this is actually full of stuff. So this bag, I actually just took this bag on a cruise, which is why it's kind of full of stuff. But inside we have pockets galore. So let's go through the pockets. First, we have a zipper pocket with a zipper accent. The pattern has 3 different zipper accent designs, so you can kind of pick which design you want. I do add these little tabs on each side. So you can see this little tab here with the hardware. It has a D-ring, and then I just hooked this little pouch to it that already has a swivel hook on it. So you can see I have another one of the little hooks over here. This one actually has like a hook on it, not just a D-ring, and so I hooked my little hand sanitizer to that. On the sides over here, I have mesh pockets. These actually will work really well as a water bottle pocket. Some of my testers did modify the pattern to create an actual water bottle pocket, but this mesh will work as well. I just put my sanitizer and tissues and stuff in there. And then on the other side of the lining, we have a slip pocket with a fun little accent, and it's a double slip pocket. You can make it a single slip pocket. You can arrange it so that you can fit your Kindle on one side and your pens and stuff on the other side. It's a really adaptable pattern. You can do as much or as little as you want with this thing. So I've made a few different versions of this bag so far. This is a vinyl version with foam. That's what we're gonna be doing in the tutorial today, because I do believe that's the most difficult combination to use. A medium weight vinyl with foam interfacing on a domestic machine. The seams can get kind of bulky, so I want to walk you through the method for doing that. However, if you use lighter weight material or no stabilizer, it's going to be a lot easier for you to put this together. So let me show you some other options. So here is the Wish Tote that I actually made in the pattern, and this is a vinyl, like medium to lightweight vinyl version with no stabilizer. So you can see it has a bit of a droop to it. It doesn't keep its structure super well. But sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes you want to be able to squish it in a bag. You could definitely make this bag with quilt cotton. You could quilt it onto batting, and you could have more of like a Vera Bradley type bag where it's very squishy and easy to like mush up into your bag. But then also you can open it up and fit a lot of stuff in it. For me personally, I love to make these bags so they're really easy to keep clean, which is why I use a vinyl or a faux leather on the outside. And then I'll either use a water resistant canvas or even a bonded nylon, which is my new favorite lining. I'll use that on the inside because again, it's just all really easy to wipe down and keep clean. The first version of this, I used a cotton canvas and quilt cotton. So the sides are quilt cotton and the front and the back are cotton canvas, and I interfaced this to Decoville Light. So you can see this bag, even though it's like the lightest weight material, it actually holds its shape really, really well, and that's because of the interfacing. So play around with that. Play around with your stabilizer, play around with your material. This is a pattern that uses a lot of material, so it's not a scrap-friendly one, but as always, I would say use what you have. Don't go out and buy a bunch of foam if you've never worked with foam before. I would say start with, a fusible fleece, quilt batting, Decoville light, something that you're more comfortable with, and then move on to the thicker stuff. But it is a really, really fun bag to make. So like I said, this is a pattern written by me, so any feedback, any questions you have, please leave them down below. You can also email me. I'm Jessica@OklaRoots.com. This pattern is available on Shop OklaRoots. I will have a link down below. At time of filming, I haven't decided just yet if I'm going to do this or not, but I am considering offering this in a spiral bound form with a large sheet of paper that has all the pattern pieces on it, so you can just cut it out. I'm still up in the air, so if you think that this is something that would be helpful for you, let me know. This would be a separate purchase, but it is something we could offer, a printed version of this. We can just mail this little set to you. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, tips, tricks, additions, changes you may, leave them down in the comment section down below. Also, if you're a content creator and you want to do a tutorial for this, you are always more than welcome to use any of my patterns in your videos. All I ask is you don't share the measurements, just make sure you link to the pattern. But other than that, if you want to make this and put it on your TikTok, on your Instagram, or YouTube, whatever, go for it. If you share your version of this bag on social media, I would love for you to tag me. I'm OklaRoots everywhere. Just tag me and I'll see it. I get very excited about this. You're also welcome to email me photos. Alright guys, let's get started. So for the wish tote, you're going to need a yard of exterior material if you're using some sort of like a quilt cotton or a water resistant canvas or a wax canvas. If you're using vinyl, you're going to want about 2 rolls of vinyl that is 18 inches wide. Now I like to mix up my pieces a lot. I'm actually going to be constructing a pieced front and back using these 2 vinyls here, and then I'm going to use this fun foil vinyl as little accents throughout the bag. So this is a great opportunity to switch around your colors. I like to use something different for the front and the back, and then something different for the base and the sides. I wouldn't say this is a scrappy friendly project, but you could use vinyl from various remnants of other projects to construct the exterior. For the lining, you're going to need at least 1 1/4 yard of material. Once again, I'm going to be kind of mixing that up. For the majority of the lining on the inside of the bag, I'm going to be using a bonded nylon. And then for the pockets and just kind of some smaller pieces, I'm going to be using a water-resistant canvas. I would suggest something lightweight for the lining. All right, now these 3 things are optional. Stabilizer is completely optional. If you're using just vinyl for your exterior and you don't mind your bag having a bit of a droop to it, then you don't have to add any stabilizer whatsoever to the main panels. I'm going to be using foam today just because I want to show you how to work with that. I don't typically add foam to these bags, but I know a lot of you are going to be interested in this. If you're using a quilt cotton material for your exterior, I would highly suggest you add some foam or Decoville light to it, because quilt cotton, the bag will just fall down on itself. If you're adding foam or Decoville light or any sort of stabilizer to the majority of the exterior of the bag, you're going to want at least a yard of that. For the base, I do suggest you add some stabilizer, some heavy stabilizer. So I have Decoville heavy. It could also be Peltex, just something nice and firm. That's going to prevent the bottom of the bag from drooping down when you put stuff in it. We want the structure of the bag to stay, the shape that it's intended to be. So you're going to need a cut of 15 inches by 6 inches. Heavy stabilizer just for the base. And then I have some mesh fabric here. I'm going to use this for the side pockets on the inside of the bag. These are totally optional. I actually use these as water bottle pockets. Some of my testers actually used large pieces of elastic, or they even cut their own little strip of material to create a water bottle pocket. So make sure you go check out all the photos the testers left. But I do like the mesh pockets on the inside of the bag. Again, completely optional. And if you're going to use this, you need about a fat quarter of mesh. All right, so here's some of our hardware and things. For the handles, I would suggest you have about 3.5 yards. Now, if you use the measurements I put in the pattern, you're gonna have just over 3 yards of webbing. You're gonna have 4 cuts of your webbing that are each 13 inches long, and the width of your webbing can be whatever you want. If you wanna use 1 inch wide, that's fine, 1.5 inch, 2 inch even, 3/4 inch. Any width webbing you have is going to work here. But you're going to have 4 cuts for the anchors on the front and back panels, and you're going to have 2 cuts for the handle. Now, I'm making my handles about 29.5 inches long each. You might want them to be longer. So if you do, that's where I say you need at least 3.5 yards of webbing. Then you're going to want at least 40 inches of zipper tape. I like using plastic zipper tape. These coils look like metal, but they're not. They're plastic. I can easily sew over them. They are number 5 zippers, meaning they are 5 millimeters wide at the coil pieces. You're going to have 2 cuts of this. One is going to be 10 inches and the other one is going to be at least 21.5 inches long. It can be longer. It's okay. It has an extended zipper end that we just tuck into the bag. So it's perfectly fine for this to be longer, but don't have it less than 29.5 inches. Then completely optional, I have a couple of little accents here. I have a 1/2 inch wide swivel hook and a 1/2 inch wide D-ring. These I'm going to install inside the bag, and these are great options to clip things to. So let's say you have a little keychain that has a clip on it, you can clip it onto the D-ring. Let's say you have a keychain or an item that doesn't have any sort of clip on it, just has like the key ring, then you can clip it onto the swivel hook. It just makes it easy to put things in your bag that you need quick access to. Then you're going to need 4 rectangle rings. And honestly, if you're a bag maker, you might need to go out and get this particular piece of hardware. I know I don't always have this, but these 4 rectangle rings are going to be how we connect the anchor straps to the handles on the front and the back of the bag. And these need to be the same width as your webbing. So I'm using 1.5 inch wide webbing. These are all 1.5 inches wide. I would not substitute it with D-rings. It does need to be rectangle rings. Optional are purse feet. I like the look of them. If you're making a more structured bag, you're using Decavil Light, you're using foam, you're using Decavil Heavy on the base, I would suggest you add purse feet to this. It's just a nice look. If you're using a more comfy bag, maybe you're quilting it on fusible fleece, and it's gonna have more of a droopy look to it in the end, then purse feet are honestly not really recommended for that type of look. But if you're going to use purse feet, I suggest you use 5 of them. And you can use these ones with the prongs, or you can use the ones with your cam snap, which is what I usually like to do. I just don't have them in this color. And then finally, totally optional, is some elastic binding. This is going to be for those mesh side pockets. So if you're not doing the mesh side pockets, you don't need any of this elastic binding. I would suggest about 1/2 yard of this just to be safe. Also, we have some rivets here. The number of rivets really varies from 0 to 16. It really just depends. If you're using a 1 inch wide strap and you're going to use rivets, you really only need to add 1 rivet to each handle and to each of the strap anchors. If you have a thicker strap like I do, you might want to add 2. So it's totally optional how many rivets you use. I will say if you're going to add them to all of your anchors, you're going to need at least 4, 1 for each anchor. And then if you're going to add them to your handles, you're going to need at least 4, 1 for each end of the handle. But if you're using a wider strap like I am, I need at least 2 for each one of those positions. So that's why you might need more or less depending on where you want to add them. All right, this is pretty much all the other stuff. Rivet press and hole punch, because I am using rivets. If you're not using rivets, you don't need any of that. I have my metal bag tag as always. I have some clips to hold everything together. I have this like 1/2 inch wide duct tape. This is really just to go with the metal bag tag, just to protect it. Same with the Beacon 3-in-1 glue. That's for the metal bag tag. I have a turning wand and a seam ripper and a stiletto. These are kind of just things I always have with me, same as the air erasing marker, the silver ink pen, and a chalk pencil. The thread I'm going to be using today is a Tex 45 weight thread. It's color Buttercream from Saya Swag. This will be going through the needle. It is a thicker thread and looks really nice with top stitching, but in my bobbin, I'm actually using a Mara 100 weight thread, polyester thread, and it's a more lightweight thread that just works better with my bobbin. Then the needles I have a couple needles here. I have a Microtex 8012 and a Microtex 9014. Just because some of the seams might be kind of thick, I suggest you always have these 2 needles if you're bag making. I use 8012 99% of the time. But if I get to a part of a bag where I'm like, man, this is just kind of looking thick and a little daunting, I'm just going to switch over to a 9014. It's going to make it a lot easier. Double-sided tape, I suggest you always have 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch wide double-sided tape. I'll be using quite a bit of this today. I have this little template right here. This is actually part of the fancy strap templates. This is helpful with placement of rivets. So since I'm using a 1.5 inch wide strap, this is actually the fancy strap template that goes with the 1.5 inch wide size. And I have rivet placement marks in here. Totally optional. If you don't have the fancy strap template set, you can look at Carolina Little Stitches. She sells guides like this and templates just for rivet placement, so I would suggest getting one of those. And a lighter as always. This is kind of a secret weapon in bag making because it really cleans up all those little threads and makes it look really polished. Now before we get into the pattern pieces, I just really could use your feedback. So if you can comment down below if you're interested in a printed version of this, I'd appreciate that. I am trying it out. So here's a printed version of the pattern. It's spiral bound and it has all of the photos and everything and information in it. And to go with that, I thought this might be cool. This is actually just an enormous piece of paper that has all of the pattern pieces printed on it. So you wouldn't have to print them out yourself and put them together. You could just buy this as a set and then cut them out like that. So if this is something you guys are interested in, let me know. I find it very useful, and I always say please don't print out my patterns because my patterns are extremely photograph heavy, and this is going to use up so much of your ink. So this might be a more affordable option for those of you who really like to have the printed version and who don't want to spend the time taping together all the pieces of paper to put together the pattern pieces. So comment down below if this is something you're interested in, and if it's not already in the shop, I will look into adding it. So let's work through the pattern pieces. First, we're going to start with pattern piece C. Pattern piece C is the exterior main panel. Now this is going to be your 2 main panels front and back, and you can see I pieced these together. I'm going for a nautical themed bag. This is a bag for Bobby, my mom, and it's a cruise bag for her. So she said she wanted kind of like a traditional nautical theme. So we're doing these strips of material. If you're interested in how big these are, each one of these strips I cut down to 3.5 inches tall, and then the width of the bag size, and then I stitched them together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then top stitch down each seam to make it nice and flat, and then cut them down using the pattern piece. So I have 2 cuts for my front and back, and then I also have 2 cuts of the same pattern piece with my foam. I am going to be cutting out the foam from the seam. I'll show you how I do that in just a moment. Okay, here's pattern piece D, and now this is for the interior main panel. So this is your lining. Now, this is not the same size as the exterior. It is shorter, so please make sure you're not cutting the same pieces. So you're gonna have 2 cuts of your lining material for this. I'm using the bonded nylon. I don't have any interfacing or anything like that attached to them. Now to go with that interior lower panel, we have the interior top panel, and this is not the same width as the lower panel. I know, you gotta be really focused on the pattern pieces here, but this is pattern piece E, and you're gonna have 2 cuts of your exterior material for this. So I'm using my vinyl. You could use your interior for this as well, but this is going to kind of peek out on the inside of the top of the bag above the zipper. So if you wanted to kind of match up with your exterior material, then use that. These 2 cuts will wrap around entirely on the bag. They are not going to stop at just the front and back panels. They're going to go around the entire bag. Okay, so next we have pattern piece A, which is our exterior side panel. You're gonna have 2 cuts of your exterior material. I'm just using solids for that. And then I have 2 cuts of my foam. And then you're gonna have pattern piece B, which is your lower side panel with the interior material. So you see these are not the same height. This is shorter, that's intentional. So you're gonna have 2 cuts of your lining material for that. Next, we can look at the top and the bottom. We have pattern piece H, and this is gonna be for the main zipper panel. Now we have a lower zipper. We have a nice big wide zipper that's gonna be a little bit lower down in the bag. It's not gonna be at the very top. So you're gonna have 2 cuts of your exterior material for that. I'm gonna use this fun foil vinyl just to make it fun. I would suggest a more lightweight side vinyl, maybe light to medium weight. I wouldn't suggest a really thick vinyl for these zipper panels because we do have a lot of folding and turning right side out to do, and the seams can get a little thick. And then I have 2 cuts of my interior material. And then for the base of the bag, you're gonna have 1 cut of your exterior material and 1 cut of your interior material. And then I'm adding foam here. If you don't wanna add foam, you don't have to. The stabilizer cut for that is a different size. The stabilizer is not gonna be in the seam. So make note of that. This is not your stabilizer base cut. Okay, now let's go through the pocket. So for the zipper accent pocket, I have a cut of my fun vinyl, and then I have 2 cuts of my interior material, and this is going to be that water resistant canvas. This is gonna go with the zipper. I also have a little woven bag tag that I'm gonna add to this. This is a fun detail. And when you download the pattern, you actually have 3 printable options here. You have the star template, which kind of goes with the theme. This is the Wish tote based off of the Wish cruise ship with Disney, and the star, the wishing star, and everything like that. So the star template really is the theme of the bag, but I know not everybody wants to cut out those cuts, so we also have these other 2 templates available to make it a little bit easier. The next pocket is pattern piece F. This is a slip pocket. For this, you're gonna have 1 cut of your interior material, and then you're gonna have 1 cut of your accent vinyl. It does need to be vinyl if you're gonna be adding this to it. This is a kind of a large slip pocket, but it's a really, really cute detail. It's easy to add. And then I have my 2 cuts of mesh and elastic. This is just going to be for the pocket on the sides. So this elastic is actually way too long, but this is going to be for the little side pockets, totally optional. Make a great water bottle pocket. If you wanna mix it up and create your own like kind of sling or something like that to create a different type of pocket, I say go for it. It's nice and big, so you have a lot of room to play. And then finally, we have just our little scrap pieces. I have 2 cuts of my vinyl. These are gonna be for those 1/2-inch hardware, so the 1/2-inch D-ring and the 1/2-inch swivel hook. Totally optional. Then I have a cut of fabric for the zipper end. Now you could use a metal zipper end, and that's very easy, but I'm just gonna show you how to use vinyl for that. This is for the main zipper on the very top of the bag, the very end. You really never see it, so you don't have to be too picky about that. And then I have 4 cuts of strap ends. These are going to be for my handles. I'm not adding any strap ends to the anchor straps, so it's not necessary, but these will go on the ends of the handle. You could also use metal strap ends for that if you prefer. It gives it a very professional look. And last but not least is our stabilizer. Now this is the base stabilizer, and make note that this is a smaller cut than the base panel. This is a heavy stabilizer. We don't want to sew over this. We don't want this in a seam. We want to avoid that. So we're going to adhere this either with heat or glue. If you're using purse feet, this is actually another great way to anchor down your stabilizer. It's kind of my strategy, because when we start shoving this bag through the hole, because it is a birthed bag, I find that even if you adhere it with glue or heat, the stabilizer still detaches from the base of the bag, so having the purse feet is really helpful. You could also add this in at the very end after you have birthed the bag and turned it right side out. You can just slide it into that base panel before you close everything up, but that's an option if you're not adding purse feet. Okay, so this step is not in the pattern because it is an extra step. Working with foam can be great, but also a little challenging, so this is just a video only addition. But I'm going to show you how I based on my foam to my panels. So I'm going to start with my exterior main panels. I'm going to do this for the front and the back and the sides. For the base, we'll do something a little different. So we're going to just lay our foam. There's no right side or wrong side up, but just make sure you lay your foam out, and also make sure you note always what the top and the bottom of your panels are. I know these shapes are a little strange. They're all trapezoids. They're not rectangles. So for the front and back panel, the top is wider than the bottom. For the side panels, it's the opposite. The bottom is wider than the top. So I'm just going to pull these. So I have my main panel laying right over my foam cut, right side up, just like that. So you can use plastic clips to hold these in place, but when you have thick material like this, I find these like metal clips are really helpful. So I'm just gonna add a few around the exterior main panel. So I'm gonna repeat this with the other main panel. So I have those two prepped. I'm going to set those to the side. And then for the side panels, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to lay my exterior right side up over the foam, matching it up exactly along all edges, and then just gently clip it like that. And do this for both side panels. So I'm going to take all 4 of these panels to the sewing machine, and I'm going to baste them on at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Later, we're going to be sewing everything using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So 1/4 inch is cutting it close. Maybe you want to do more of a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is just a tiny bit less than a 1/4 inch. But we do want it big enough so that we can cut the foam out of the seam allowance. So if you basted this on at an 1/8 inch seam allowance, it's going to be really hard to get that foam out of the seam allowance later. So we're going to just base this on 1/4 inch seam allowance. Take your time. Okay, so once you have the foam basted on, if you're doing that, I would suggest trimming out the foam from a few places. Now, for me personally, the foam in the side seams for most of it and the bottom seam are totally fine because we're not top stitching any of that. That's where the foam gets tricky. When you sew it to another piece of material, like when you sew these two together and then you open them up and then you top stitch, that's the tricky part. This part, the sewing the two pieces together, really not that hard with the foam in the seams. It's the top stitching. And we're not going to be doing any top stitching on the sides or the bottom, but we will be doing top stitching along the top edge here. So that's where I like to make sure I trim out as much stabilizer as I can. So I'm just going to flip this over, and I'm going to gently pull up on my foam, and I just have my scissors just kind of like shave along that edge. Don't cut the vinyl. Don't cut your stitching. If you lay it like this and cut, you won't cut your stitching. Just gently go along this and trim down that foam. Now, we're not getting the foam entirely out of the seam. We're still going to have the foam in the seam. And that's okay. We want it to not really be there when we do the top stitching. And that's where this trick really does come in handy. So once you have that top edge trimmed down, I would suggest also trimming down just about 1 inch on the top side. Just like that. Just a little bit. You don't have to do a whole bunch. Just a little bit on the top side. So repeat that with the other front or back panel. And then from the side panels, now remember on the side panels, the shorter end is the top. We also want to trim down the foam from that side because this will also be top stitched. And then go ahead and once again, pull away the material and trim down the foam on the sides by the top edge, just by about 1 inch below the top edge. So do that for the other side panel as well. So once you have the foam trimmed out of those specific sides, I then suggest you flip this over to the right side and just take a look at the edge of your material, and if you have the foam sticking out beyond the vinyl or whatever material you're using for the front and back panels, trim it down because that will become distracting later when we're attaching this. We don't want the seam to be based off of the edge of the foam. We want it to be based off the edge of our material. So we're just making sure that the foam is the exact same size or even just a little bit smaller than our vinyl. So like you see here how it really comes off there. If I'm sewing this, I might mistakenly use that edge of the foam as the edge of my material, and then I'm not gonna have an accurate seam allowance. So I'm just gonna trim that down because we don't need that. Okay, the foam step for the sides and the front and the back are done. You can set them to the side. Now we're gonna work on the base panel when we install the purse feet. So I'm gonna save that step for then. Now let's work on the front panel. So you're gonna need 2 of your anchor webbings, your front exterior panel, 2 rectangle rings, and a marking tool and a ruler. Now what we wanna do right off the bat is mark the midpoint on the top and the bottom of this front panel. And then we're gonna take one of our rectangle rings and one of our anchor webbings. And we're gonna thread the webbing around the bottom of your rectangle ring, and you're gonna fold the webbing wrong sides together. So if you have a printed webbing and you have like a right side and a wrong side, you're gonna fold it over so it's wrong sides together. And I like to have the webbing overhang by 1 inch. So you can just take your ruler, line it up, make sure it's 1 inch. You want this to be pretty precise. You don't want to lose this placement because we do want them to be the same on both sides. And if one is like 1 inch and the other one's 1.5 inches, you're gonna notice that they don't line up on this. So once you have that folded over, flip it so it's fold over side facing up, and then grab some 1/4 inch wide double-sided tape and add at least 1 strip. You could do 2 strips if you prefer, and you're gonna have it run right underneath the middle rectangle ring all the way to the bottom. Now we're gonna mark a couple points. First, on the bottom left corner, I'm starting with the left side strap. So on the bottom left corner here, I'm gonna measure in 1 inch from the corner. So not, remember the side is angled, so 1 inch from the bottom corner, and I'm gonna make a tick mark right on the bottom edge here. And then I'm gonna grab my ruler and I'm going to measure 4 inches to the left of the midpoint on the top edge of my main panel. Go like just like that. So what we wanna do is we wanna take our strap and we want the outer left edge of our strap to match up with that 1 inch mark, and we want the middle of our strap to line up with the edge of the ruler. So this is where it gets a little tricky depending on what size strap you're using, because if you're using a 1 inch wide strap, it's going to be in a different place than a 1.5 inch wide strap. This is why I wrote it that way instead of saying like the left edge should match up here. I want the middle. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna match up the bottom outer left corner of my webbing with that 1 inch mark down here and just clip it in place. And then I'm just gonna kind of pivot this until I see the middle of my webbing is matching up with that 4 inch mark. It doesn't have to be super exact. If it's an 1/8 of an inch to the left or the right, that's okay. If you wanna get more precise, you can do that. I'll show you how. Let's see. For those of you who wanna be really precise, let's just do this. You're gonna need a marking tool that you can erase. So make sure it's not a Sharpie or anything. I'm gonna measure 4 inches to the left of the midpoint, and I'm just gonna draw a mark right there. And then I'm gonna take my ruler and I'm gonna go down about 3 inches, and I'm just gonna make a light mark with my pen. There we go. So now I have a line, okay? So then when I pull my webbing up, I'm gonna pivot this around so that the middle of my webbing, where it is wrapped around that rectangle ring, matches up with that line. You see? Just like that. So once I know how it's gonna work, I'm going to take the paper off my double-sided tape, and then I'm going to replace this just like it was. There we go. Now I've had some people ask why this is at an angle, why is it not straight? The reason it's not straight is because when we attach the handles are gonna be going at an angle, right? So what happens is you have a lot of pressure being put on one side of the webbing that's attached to the rectangle ring, right? So if it's straight, then this rectangle ring is gonna wanna twist to accommodate the handle when it's being used. And this is a big bag, so if you have a lot of heavy stuff in it, like a laptop, eventually those stitches are gonna start to rip, the material might start to rip. There's too much exertion being put on one side. It's not an equal distribution of, of weight, right? And that's the goal here with the bag. We want it to be equally distributed so that way everything takes a little bit of the burden instead of one thing taking almost all the burden, which is why we have it at an angle. If you wanted to do these straight, you could. I wouldn't suggest it though. Okay, once you have this exactly where you want it, if you want to go ahead and tape on the other one first just to see how they look, you can. I'm going to top stitch this down first. So I'm going to top stitch along the long edges of the webbing at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm just going to go right underneath that metal bar using a zipper foot so I can get nice and close. If you're not using rivets, I suggest you also top stitch like a little X or a rectangle that holds down the fold over of the webbing right underneath the rectangle ring. I, however, will be using rivets. Okay, so there's one strap attached. Now let's repeat that with the other strap. So once again, I'm going to grab my webbing and I'm going to fold it wrong sides together around the rectangle ring, making sure it's folded over 1 inch. And this is where it is important, because if it's too far off, your webbings are not going to match up, and I might regret using these strips of material because you're really going to be able to notice if they don't meet up at the same space. And then I'm going to add some double-sided tape, and the double-sided tape also helps to hold down that fold over. And then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to mark 4 inches to the right this time of the midpoint, and then I'll just mark about 3 inches down, a nice light line that I can erase later. And on the bottom right corner, I'm going to measure 1 inch in from the bottom right corner along the bottom edge. And then let's just lay this out to make sure it looks right. So the outer right corner of the webbing is going to match up with that 1 inch mark. And I'm going to twist this so the middle matches up with that line. That's 4 inches from the top. And that looks good. They both line up at the same spot. They have the same angle. Okay, once you're happy with that, you can take the paper off your double-sided tape and then just tape this down. And then once again, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the long edges of the webbing at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then using a zipper foot, just get as close as you can underneath that rectangle ring. I like to start and stop at the bottom of the webbing and make sure you're also going over that bottom edge of webbing. All right, so now you have your straps attached, and now I'm just going to grab a little microfiber cloth and a little bit of water, and I'm going to wipe off this marking. You want to wipe it off now because if it gets on other material that's not vinyl, it won't leave it. So you need to make sure you keep that nice and clean. Now I'm going to cut down the overhang of the webbing on the bottom. And when I'm working with nylon, you see all these little shreds here. It frays and we don't want that. So I'm going to grab a lighter and just melt down that cut edge so it doesn't fray and cause a problem later. Okay, now I'm going to attach my rivets. Now I have this handy dandy little tool here, so just showing you with this tool, I'm going to line it up right underneath my stitching. So the top edge of this goes right along that top stitching right there. And I'm going to use the top 2 dots to just mark placement. Now, if you don't have a tool like this, I'm going to show you what else you can do. So there's placement for that. Now, if you want to just use measurements, I'm measuring 1/4 inch down from the top stitching, and each one of these dots is 3/8 of an inch in from the edge. So I can just go over to this side over here, just kind of lining up my ruler so I can measure 1/4 inch down from the top stitching, 3/8 of an inch from the left, 1, 2, 3/8 of an inch from the right, and it's the same placement as if I were to use this tool. So easy either way. So now I'm going to grab my hole punch and I'm going to punch out holes where those placement marks are. It's a little tricky if you have stiff material, so if you use a hole punch on your rivet press, that's also a great option. This is going to be tricky for me. And once you have those holes punched, just pop in your rivets, snap them in place. See, I like rivets because, I mean, they look nice, they make the bag look pretty professional, but they're also just, they're a lot easier for me than top stitching. So if I try to make a fun little rectangle with an X through it, some of you guys are really good at that. And I would suggest if you do that, draw it out first and then just trace the lines. Don't try to willy-nilly it at the machine, which is what I do. And it looks kind of wild. Okay, so now I have my rivets installed. And all I have to do is grab my rivet press, set that down, and press all these in place. All right, and then that's how I build one of the main panels. Now I'm gonna repeat that exactly for the back panel. This is gonna be my front panel. Just do the exact same thing for your other main panel. I'm gonna do that off camera because it's the exact same steps. Okay, so here we have, I'm gonna use this as the back panel and I'm gonna use this other one as the front panel. So once you have determined which one's your front panel, if you want to add a bag tag to it, I like to add mine like 2 inches down and centered. Now I need to see if that's going to be on a seam or not. So I'm going to have it go a little bit lower because that's like right on a seam. So I'm going to have mine go about 2.5 inches down, centered between my 2 anchor webbings. And I'm just going to mark that midpoint there. And since I'm using a metal bag tag, I have a washer to go with this. I gotta find the middle of my washer. So once you have the markings for your bag tag, you can just very, very gently cut along those 2 marks with a seam ripper. And if you're using a sew-on bag tag, you can sew through the foam and everything. It's not gonna be a problem. So either way, metal, sew in, no bag tag, whatever. So I'm just gonna kind of audition this. I'm just gonna stick it in there. See how it looks. Looks pretty straight to me. Yep, it looks nice. All right, so with metal bag tags, I like to add a little bit of glue to the back of them. I have found that sometimes I hit the metal bag tags a lot, and over time, these prongs can kind of wear down, and then the tag just falls off, and there's no fixing that. So I like to add glue just to make them last longer. And now I'm just gonna insert this through the slits. And now if you're just using your exterior material, maybe it's vinyl, maybe it's canvas or whatever, and you don't have any sort of stabilizer or foam or anything back here, you will want to grab a cut, like a scrap piece of either vinyl or a scrap piece of stabilizer, something like that, and add that over the prongs to beef it up. You don't want it to just be the metal prongs and the material, because over time the material could rip. And so having some sort of stabilizer, like I have the foam on the back, helps with that. But I already have the foam here, so I don't need anything extra. So I'm just going to push my washer down and then fold the tags in on themselves. Make sure it looks just the way I want it. Very cute. Then I'll grab some duct tape, just a small cut, and add that over the metal prongs just to protect the lining. And there we go. Front panel done, back panel done. You can set these to the side. Okay, so now we're going to work on the base panel. So you should have your stabilizer and your exterior base panel, and if you're using the foam, have that as well. On the back of my exterior panel, I marked in 1/2 inch from all 4 edges, and I drew a line. It's really hard to see, I think, though, but it's there. It's faint, but it's there. And what I want to do is I want to take my stabilizer, and I want to use those guidelines to center this over the back side, the wrong side of my base panel, just like this. Now you can take this to the iron and adhere this if you'd like, or you can glue it down. It's totally up to you. So I used an iron to adhere this, but I will tell you that once we birth this, there's a good chance that the Decovil Heavy is going to unadhere from the exterior, and that's expected. That's totally okay. Now, since I'm using foam, I'm actually going to now add the foam. So I have my firm stabilizer sandwiched between the vinyl and the foam. So the foam is going to the wrong side of the base panel. So I'm just going to flip this over so I'm looking at the vinyl and lining up all 4 edges, making sure it's completely covering the foam. I'm going to use my clips again, and I'm just going to hold these together. Now I'll take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to base the foam on at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, at about a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance of just under that. Now if you'd like to cut the foam out of the seam allowance, you can. I'm going to leave it. However, I am going to make sure I trim down the foam where it's overhanging the edge of my exterior material, because I don't want to accidentally use that as the edge when I'm figuring out my seam allowance later. So now I'm going to attach purse feet, and I'm going to use the template to help me with that. If you didn't print out the base panel template and you're just using measurements, the pattern does tell you exactly what the measurements are for a placement for all of these. But if you have the template, you might as well just use that. So I'm going to lay this over the right side of my exterior base panel, and I'm just going to mark placement for all 5 of my purse feet. And if you prefer to use 4 or 6, you can definitely change this around. I feel like 5 is just enough. Now the purse feet I'm using use washers, just like my bag tag. So I'm going to just center the washer over each dot and draw in the little vertical slits, and that's going to be placement for the prongs. So I'm just going to do this for all 5 of my markings. And then I'll grab my seam ripper and just very, very gently rip along each one of these. Now this is a little tricky because I have a lot of stabilizer here. I have the Decovil Heavy, and I have the foam, and I have that vinyl. So you don't want to lose control here. Just tiny, tiny slits. They don't need to be very big. All right, once you have those cut, you can grab your purse foot. If you have a rivet press, you can actually get a purse foot die and special purse feet that don't have the prong. You can just press them in just like a rivet, and those are really easy to use. So I'm gonna spread the prongs and then insert them into the slits. Push it all the way through, just like that. Look at the back. I'm gonna grab one of the washers, apply it over the prongs. I'm gonna spread them away from one another because I don't think they'll work if I spread in on each other. There we go. And then after I have them spread out like that, I'm gonna grab some tape and attach that over the metal so it doesn't mess up my lining. So I'm gonna repeat that for the other 4 purse feet. All right, there we go. Now we have our purse feet installed, all protected on the back. Your bottom panel, your base panel is all ready to go. So now we're gonna build the exterior, which is pretty fun because it kind of gives you the look of the finished bag right away. So we're gonna make sure we have midpoints marked everywhere we need them. You need them on the top and the bottom of your front and back panels. You need them on all 4 edges of your base panel, and then also mark the midpoints on the top and the bottoms of your side panels. So the technique we're using is one of my favorites because it gives a very structured, kind of like a boxed bag without boxing the corners. But you have to be mindful when you're doing this. So let's work through this slowly. Let's start with our base panel. And we're gonna lay our base panel wrong side up. So we're looking at the back of it. Grab a ruler and we're going to measure little 3/8 of an inch boxes on the bottom corner of each corner of our base panel. Now make sure you're using the edge of the vinyl, not the edge of the foam. If you feel like you need to cut down the foam a little bit so you can see the edge of your exterior material better, go ahead and do that. But you're gonna measure 3/8 of an inch in from the side and 3/8 of an inch from the bottom or top, making these little boxes. Do this for all 4 corners. And you wanna use a marking tool that's gonna last for a little bit because you wanna be able to see this while we're building the exterior. Okay, so the rule here is that we never sew all the way to an edge on the bottom of the bag. Our needle is never gonna go over the very edge of the bottom of the bag. So grab your front panel and lay it right side up. Grab your base panel and lay it right side down and match up the bottom edges. I like to match up the midpoints and then the corners and clip along this bottom edge. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew along this bottom clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, but you're not going off the edge. You're gonna start at the corner of one of your little marked boxes on the bottom of your base panel, backstitch there, and then continue on until you get to the corner of your other boxed mark and backstitch there. You're not going all the way to the edge of the material. You're just going from one box corner to the next, sewing at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So after I get done sewing this, you can see I can pull up the corners here and I can pull the 2 corner pieces away from one another. See? They're not sewn all the way to the edge. That's important. Now take your exterior back panel and lay right side up. Take the unit that has the base panel attached, spread the unit and the front panel away from one another, and lay it right side down. And we're gonna take the other long edge of our base panel and we're gonna line it up on the bottom edge of the back panel, right sides together. Once again, matching up midpoints and corners and clip together. So now we're gonna sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, starting and stopping at our boxed marked corners, backstitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once again, just double check that you can pull the corners away from one another. So set this to the side and grab your 2 side panels. Now remember, the side panel bottoms are the wider parts. So the top is more narrow, the bottom is wider. We wanna focus on the bottom. Grab your ruler again, and you're going to mark those 3/8 of an inch boxes on the bottom corner here. So we're focusing on the bottom left and bottom right corners. I know it's a little slanted, just do your best to mark these little boxes, just like we did on the base panel. Do this for both of your side panels. Okay, this is where it starts to get tricky just because it's a big bag. So let's flip this around and look at our front panel. So front exterior main panel facing right side up. I kind of have everything else pushed out of the way. Grab one of your side panels, whichever one you want to go on the right side here, and you're gonna lay it right side up. So this is how we're gonna line it up, right? Make sure you don't have it upside down. Make sure it's tucked in just like this. Now we're going to fold our side panel right sides together with the right side of our front panel. Grab some clips and clip along this edge, corner to corner. And you'll notice when you come down here to the bottom corner where the front panel is connected to the base panel, you can spread the base panel out of the way and pull the corner of your side panel right sides together with the corner of the front panel. And you can clip those corner to corner by, again, just pushing that base panel out of the way. Okay, like I said, this is tricky because of the size of the bag. But what we want to do now is we want to take this to the sewing machine and we want to sew from the very top, the very, very top edge, no gap up here, the very top edge of the side panel down to your boxed mark. So your 3/8 of an inch box mark, you're going to stop there. So you're going to sew along this edge at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the very top edge where you start, and also backstitch where you stop at the corner of that boxed 3/8 of an inch mark. You're not going all the way to the bottom edge of the side panel. Okay, so you see once you have that attached, all 3 of these corners don't touch, but the stitching is going to start matching up for all of them. So in the end, where we're starting and stopping at these boxed corners here, the stitching is going to match up for all 4 of them, and they're going to come together and you don't have a hole. It's kind of, I don't know, it's a method I really like. It gives a really, really sharp finish. Okay, and now you can kind of construct this however you'd like. If you'd like to start attaching the back panel to that side panel, you can. I'm going to go through my method of doing this because it is such a big bag. You do start to wrestle with it. So what I'm going to do now is attach the other side panel to the left side of the front panel. So I'm going to take my left side panel and lay it right sides together, lining it up along the left edge, corner to corner of my front panel. And just like we did on the other side, we're going to stitch off the top edge, and then we're going to stitch to the boxed corner, so not all the way to the bottom edge. So I'm actually going to start at the boxed corner this time. I'm going to backstitch right at the top of that corner, sew along the side at a 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way to the very edge at the very top of the bag, and backstitch there as well. Okay, let's see if we can get this all in this shot. So now we have both of our side panels attached to the front panel. So I'm going to start with the right side. I'm going to open up that side panel, and then I'm going to pull up my back panel right sides together, and I'm going to line it up with the edge of that side panel. We're starting to put our bag together now. So top corners match up, bottom corners match up. Once again, just push the bottom corner of the base panel out of the way, and then just clip along this edge. I will tell you, using foam is much more difficult than without foam. So if you're just starting out, I would suggest skipping the foam for now. If you want a cushiony look, I would maybe try fusible fleece or even quilt some batting onto your material, but foam is a little tricky. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to lay it with the side panel wrong side up so I can see my marked corner on the bottom edge here, and I'm going to carefully stitch along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, starting at that box corner on the bottom, not going all the way to the edge, back stitching well, and then ending at the very top edge of the side panel and back stitching there. All right, so once you have the front and back panel both attached to that right side panel, now the only thing you have left is the bottom. So you see we just have this little opening right here on the bottom, and so we're going to just pull the bottom together. You can use those midpoint marks to line them up right sides together, and you already have the corners lined up right sides together because of attaching the front and back to the sides. And now we're going to take this to the sewing machine with either the base panel facing up or the side panel, whichever one's easier for you. They both have the marks, so just pick out which side's easier. I think maybe for me the side panel is going to be easier. And we're going to stitch from the corner of one of our boxes to the other corner along that bottom edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and the end. And as you do this, you should notice that your needle is connecting with the ending stitches along the sides of either the side panel or the base panel, connecting all 3 of those stitch lines together so they meet up in the same spot. So once you have that bottom piece sewn, I'm just going to flip this around, reach inside the bag with your hand and just kind of poke your finger into the 2 corners, and as long as your fingertip doesn't go through it, then they're closed up enough, because once we flip this bag right side out, it's going to close it up even more. If you could fit, like a turning tool or the tip of a pen through there, that's totally fine. If you're a little worried about it, you can go close it up some more. So I don't know if you can see right here, there's a little gap in my stitching where they meet up. If I wanted to, I could just kind of stitch down a little bit further to make sure that they meet up at the exact same spot, but I am actually okay with how this looks. So now I'm going to repeat that with the other side. So I'm going to take the left side panel and I'm going to lay it right sides together with the left side of my back panel and clip these together. Now I'm going to turn this bag so I'm looking at the back of the side panel, and I can hopefully Base panel is difficult. And so I can see the 3/8 of an inch boxes on the bottom corner of my side panel, and I'm going to sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, starting at the very top edge, back stitching, going all the way down to that marked corner at the bottom, and back stitching there as well. Alrighty, we've got the side done. So now we're just going to work on that hole on the very bottom edge. So just pull these two short edges together, right sides together, and clip along that short edge. The lining is a lot easier to put together because it's loosey-goosey. The exterior is difficult because of the structure. So once again, I think I'm going to lay my bag with the side facing wrong side up. I think that's going to be the easiest way for me to sew this. And I'm going to go from box corner to box corner, sewing along this short edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end, and just trying to make sure it's connecting with the stitching that I already have in place. All right, once again, reach your fingers in there and make sure you cannot push your finger through any of the corners. Once you're happy with all corners and all edges of the base is sewn in place, you're going to gently turn this bag right side out. Don't clip any of those corners or anything like that. We want the overhang of that seam to actually stay there because it's going to provide more support, and it's going to help close up any little tiny gaps that are there. Sometimes it's helpful to grab one of these wands and use like the more blunt end to really help poke out those corners gently. Now, if you find that you can see a lot of the stitching along the edge because the material you're using is really thick, then you might want to go around the base panel, just go around the seam and just sew at about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just outside of your original stitching so that you can tighten up that stitching. But this is actually looking really good. Oh, it looks nautical, right? Looks like a boat bag. Okay, just reach in and make sure you can't stick your finger or anything through any of the corners. All the corners should be nice and tight now. Okay, the exterior portion is done. You can set this to the side. So now we're going to work on the main zipper panel. And if you want to attach your zipper pull ahead of time, you can. I didn't in the pattern, but I think I'll do it for now just to show you that if you want to attach it ahead of time, you can. So I'm just going to put the zipper pull on. Okay, so when you look at your zipper tape, you have a closed end, so whenever the zipper opens, it always stays closed to the right, and whenever it closes, it's going to close towards the left. So we want to work on the open end. So you see when the zipper closes, the left side will be our open end when it opens. Does that make sense? I hope it does. What we want to do is we want to take a ruler and we want to mark 3/4 of an inch away from the open end of the zipper. So it's the part that has the opening when the zipper opens. So just mark right on the very outer edge of your zipper tape. So you have 3/4 of an inch overhanging those marks. And then we're going to just open up the zipper tape on that open end like that. And you're going to pinch the mark. So I'm working on the left side of the zipper tape. I'm just going to pinch that mark so the zipper tape goes wrong sides together. And as I pinch that, the coils are going to go up and away from the center. That's what I want. So keeping that pinch there, I'm going to fold that pinched edge over the zipper tape that's folding away. So I have a nice clean little tuck here. I have a fold that goes straight up like a 90-degree fold. The zipper goes away from the inside. The raw edge of the zipper at the very top is hanging off the left side. And I'm going to grab a clip and just clip that there. I'm going to repeat this with the right side, just pinching and letting the zipper fold towards the right, and then press that folded bit over the zipper tape so that you have something like this now, where both of them are just going away from the center. Now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm just going to top stitch right along the edge of the zipper tape on both sides at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to hold this fold in place. So now your zipper should be just like this, and if you didn't attach the zipper pull yet, that's fine, you don't have to. So now take your 4 main zipper panels and mark the midpoint along both long edges of each one of these. Now I like to kind of lay these out how I want them in the end. So my zipper is going to be right side up. Take your exterior pieces and lay them right side up. If you have a directional print, you need to figure out how you want this to look. So if you want like the directional print to be going away from the zipper or towards it, think about that. None of my print really matters, so I'm not terribly concerned, but this is kind of how I'm going to lay it out. So I'm going to move the zipper out of the way, and then I'm going to flip all 4 of these zipper panels so I'm looking at the back side of them. And then on one short edge of each one of these, mark a 1-inch line coming in from that short edge. Grab some double-sided tape and just add the double-sided tape just below the line, so a little bit closer to the raw edge, not towards the center. So Do this for all 4 of these. Now you can take the paper off of your tape and then fold that short edge back, wrong sides together, to meet that marked line, and use the tape to tape it in place. It should be just like that. Do this for all 4 of your strips, just on one side of each one of them. So what you've done is create a 1/2 inch fold over on one short edge of each one of your main zipper panels. So now take one of your lining main zipper panels and lay it right side up, and the folded over edge is going to be on the right side. On the non-folded edge here on the left side, measure 1/2 inch from the top corner, the top left corner, and just make a mark right along that long edge. I'm going to use my 1/8 inch double-sided tape for this, and I'm going to lay it from that marked edge all the way along this long edge, just right along the edge, until I get to the folded right side, all the way down to the end. Now I can take the paper off that double-sided tape, and then I'm going to grab my zipper, and I'm going to lay my zipper right side up. So this is the lining piece laying right side up, and my zipper is right side up. And I'm going to look at the top edge of my zipper that has the fold over, so the open end. So the zipper open on the left, closed on the right. The open end, I'm going to line up the coils with that 1/2 inch mark, and I'm going to line up the raw edge of my zipper tape with the long raw edge of my lining panel. And I'm just going to tape this down using that double-sided tape. So now if you have your zipper pull installed and you want to get out of the way, I suggest adding a clip to the closed edge or sewing over that so you don't lose it. So now I'm going to grab some more double-sided tape, and I'm going to go from the very top corner of that lining panel over the zipper and along the very top edge of my zipper tape all the way until where the folded edge of the lining is, stopping there and cutting it off. Remove the paper from your double-sided tape. Grab one of your exterior main zipper panels, and the folded over edge should be on the right, so it's on the same side as the folded over edge for your lining, and you're going to lay it right side down right over the zipper, lining it up along the top edge and using the tape to tape this in place. So now starting at the bottom left corner here where we have the unfolded short edges of our main zipper panels, we're going to stitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then once we get to the top corner, we're going to stitch along the long edge that we have the tape on at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end, and make sure your folded edge of your main zipper exterior and interior panels stay folded, and you will be stitching all the way to the end of those, backstitching over them. All right, once you have that sewn, trim down the corners of the unfolded edge at like a 45-degree angle, and if you want to, you can also trim down that seam in half. And then also, if you have any zipper overhang like I do, just make sure you trim that down. Wherever you cut zipper tape, also make sure you grab a lighter and melt down the edges so it doesn't fray. Now we're going to flip the exterior and interior panels wrong sides together gently. You can kind of poke in that top corner of your zipper. You can use a turning wand if you'd like, but you can also just kind of gently pull on that top corner to get it nice and straight. Now pull your exterior and interior panels wrong sides together. Find their midpoint marks along their raw edges and clip those together. And then go to the corner that has the folded over edges and clip that corner together. We want to make sure those all match up. And then just kind of pull along the raw edge to straighten them out and clip along that edge. And repeat that on the other side, just really getting everything as flat as possible. You might want to kind of reach into that opening and push out the seam that's on the open side of the zipper to flatten it out. Now to help flatten out the seam next to the zipper, I actually like to close the zipper, so pull all the way up, and then pull along the edge and press along that seam. Now if you're using material you can iron, you can just take this to the iron and do that. But you see how I just pull on the zipper teeth to flatten it out and then give it a finger press along that seam. Now what we want to do is we want to top stitch along all 4 edges of this little panel that has the exterior and interior wrong sides together at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. I suggest starting on one of the raw edge sides, baste it pretty much at an 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then go up the sides along the zipper and along the other side, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So there you go. So now you have one zipper panel installed. We're going to repeat that for the other side, but I'll walk you through it because it can be a little tricky. So lay your zipper with the panel installed right side up, and make sure the open edge is on the left and the closed edge is on the right. Then grab your remaining interior zipper main panel piece. We're going to lay this one right side up as well, and the folded edge for the interior is on the right. This time we're going to work on the bottom edge. So last time we were on the top, this time we're on the bottom. So on the very bottom edge, we're going to measure 1/2 inch from the left unfolded side and just make a mark right there. Grab some 1/8 inch wide double-sided tape, and starting at that mark, add your tape to the very bottom long edge of this interior panel, going along the entire edge and over the folded edge as well. Now you can take the paper off your double-sided tape, and then with your interior panel right side up and your zipper right side up, you can unzip your zipper. You're going to take the edge of your zipper tape that has not been attached to anything yet, and you're going to have the folded edge of your zipper teeth match up with that 1/2 inch mark, and the raw edge of the zipper tape lining up with that bottom edge, and just tape it down all the way to the end. So this is what it should look like. Now grab your double-sided tape again, and we're going to just add this corner to corner right over that bottom edge where we already have tape. But we're going to put it on top of the zipper tape this time, and then take the paper off the double-sided tape. Take your remaining exterior main zipper panel, and with the folded edge on the right, we're going to flip it right side down. Match up the midpoint marks with the interior first, and then just tape this corner to corner with that interior panel and the zipper sandwiched in between them. There we go. Now we're going to sew along the short edge that does not have the fold over at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the edge, and then once you get to the edge with the zipper tape, we're going to sew along that edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, going all the way over the folded edge and back stitching over that fold. So once you have that sewn on, we're going to focus on the side that does not have the fold over, and we're going to trim down the corners. And then I'm just going to trim that seam in half as well. And I'm also going to trim off any zipper tape overhang. But with the zipper tape, as always, melt down that edge. And then gently fold the exterior and interior panels wrong sides together, poking out that top corner of your zipper teeth. And then I like to use the midpoints along the long edges to clip them wrong sides together. And then get the corner that has the folded over edges and clip those wrong sides together nice and flat, and then just straighten out those raw edges. Make sure you smooth out the seam where you sewed the short edges together and clip along that side. And then if you have the zipper pull on, you can zip it all the way up. And you can just kind of pull on the main panel and flatten out the seam, either with an iron or with your fingers or with some sort of a flattening tool. There's all kinds of seam rollers and things out there you can use. Just get it as flat as you can. And then we'll take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to start on the raw edge. I'm going to baste along the raw edge at an 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then along the short edges and the edge by the zipper, I'm going to top stitch at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. All right, this should be your zipper panel. Isn't that fun vinyl? If you haven't already attached your zipper pull, go ahead and do that now. So if you want to use a metal zipper end, that's really easy. You just put some glue on the end of this, attach the metal over it, screw it in. It lasts forever. It looks fancy. I'm going to use vinyl though, because it's also easy. So on the wrong side of my zipper end tab, I'm going to mark a midpoint line that's between the two short edges. I'm going to add just a couple pieces of tape. You could also use glue if you'd like. I'm just going to do one on each side of that midpoint line between the line and the raw edges. Then I'm going to lay my zipper right side up, and I'm going to lay my zipper end tab wrong side up, and I'm going to take the tape off of one edge, overlay my zipper so that the end meets up with that midpoint line. I have a little bit of overhang outside the zipper tape, which is what I want. Then I'm going to take the other piece of paper off the double-sided tape and just fold this over. So it's just folded around the very edge of my zipper tape. Make sure you line up all the edges and the two corners of your zipper tab. And like I said, it should be a little bit wider than your tape. Use some clips to flatten it out. And now we'll take this to the sewing machine. I'm just going to top stitch along all four edges of that end tab at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. And there you go. Your main zipper panel is all ready to go. You can set this to the side. So now let's work on the side mesh pockets. These are completely optional, and you can play around with the pattern if you want to make these something else. But I'm just going to keep them as mesh. So I'm going to grab my two mesh cuts, and I'm going to grab my elastic, which is much longer than it needs to be. Now this is a fold over elastic, which means it has like a natural fold right along the center. So I'm just going to wrap it around the top of my mesh. If you want to use double-sided tape, you can. I find it doesn't stick terribly well to all this, so I'm just going to wrap this around and use clips to hold it in place. So I'm going to wrap the elastic around the top edge of each one of my pockets. And I'm going to take these to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch along the bottom raw edge, not the folded edge, the bottom edge of each one of these at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end each time. So if you have some binding overhang like I do, go ahead and trim down your binding or elastic, whatever you're using, so it's the same width as your mesh. So now grab one of your lining side pockets and lay it right side up. And I took a ruler and I measured 9 inches up from the bottom, and then I marked a little line on each side of my lining side pocket. So 9-inch tick marks on both sides. So what I want to do is take my mesh pocket and I want to lay it right side up. And I'm going to line up the bottom edges first. So corner to corner along the bottom. But you'll notice the side panel here is not a rectangle, but my mesh pocket is, which means the mesh pocket is going to be wider the taller up it goes, which is what I want, because for me this actually does work as a water bottle pocket because I have so much extra space. So now that I have the bottoms clipped, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top right, and I'm going to take the top right corner of my mesh pocket and line it up with that tick mark on the right. And then I'm going to kind of poof up my pocket and do the same thing on the left side, matching up the top corner of my pocket with that tick mark. So you see now we have this pocket that sticks out, which I feel like works well as a water bottle pocket, but I gotta be honest, I don't carry a water bottle around with me all that much. So that's how I set up one pocket. I'm gonna repeat that with the other one. So once you have your 2 mesh pockets clipped in place, we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and just baste along the sides and the bottoms of each one of these at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just to hold it in place. All right, your 2 side panel pockets are good to go. You can set them to the side. So now let's prepare our little key rings. These are optional. We're going to grab your little tabs and then your 2 pieces of hardware. Mine are both 1/2 of an inch wide. If you want to use 1 inch wide hardware or 3/4 of an inch wide hardware, you can. Just make sure your tabs are twice as wide as the width of your key rings. We want to keep these kind of thin. We don't want them to be double folded. So on the back side of my 2 tabs, I marked a midpoint line, and the midpoint lines are going between the 2 long edges. And then I'm going to add a piece of double-sided tape right over that midpoint line on both of these. And then remove the paper and fold the long raw edges back, wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line. Do this for both long edges. It's pretty skinny with the 1/2 inch wide ones. So you want to use vinyl that's not super thick. That's going to be challenging. I'm going to add a couple clips here too. So you see on the back side here we have the raw edges meeting, but on the front side it's nice and clean. Do this for the other tab as well. So now we're going to take both of these tabs to the sewing machine, and we're just going to top stitch along all 4 edges of each one of these tabs at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have your little tabs top stitched, you're going to thread them through your hardware, making sure you're pulling the tabs wrong sides together. The wrong sides have those raw edges, so we want to keep those kind of hidden. So I'm going to thread this around both pieces of hardware. And then you can just stitch along the 2 small edges here at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just to hold the fold in place. Once you have these prepped, you can set them to the side. So now let's work on the lining slip pocket. You're going to need your slip pocket piece of interior material and then your scrap piece of vinyl if you're going to use the accent. You could make this without the accent, but it looks really nice with the accent. So take your slip pocket unit and you're going to fold it in half, right sides together. Now if you have a directional print, it's going to be top and bottom coming right sides together. And clip along all 3 edges. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and sew along the short edges only. Leave the top edge unsewn. So only the short edges. Sew along each one of those at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, once you have those sides sewn, you can take off the clips along the top edges. Now we're just going to clip down the corners. I mean, at a bigger angle than 45-degree angle. Like it should extend about 1 inch in, so we have a nice smooth corner. Now you're gonna turn this so it's right side out. Push it out like that. Make sure you get in there and poke out those corners really well. Now flatten this out as best you can. If you'd like to iron it, you can definitely do that. I'm just going to finger press it and use clips to get this nice and flattened out. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna baste along this top raw edge. So not the folded edge, just the top raw edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to keep that edge nice and straight. Now grab your accent piece and on the wrong side, mark a midpoint line going right between both long edges. Then you can grab some 1/8 of an inch wide double-sided tape and just lay it right between the marked line and the raw edges. Not too close to either one because we don't want to sew over this. And you can add this tape to just one side or you can add it to both sides. I'll add it to both sides this time. So I'm going to take the paper off of the bottom side. And then I'm going to take my pocket laying right side up and I'm going to lay it over the wrong side of my accent, lining up the raw edge with that marked line. There we go. And you should have a little bit of overhang on each side of your accent. And then take the paper off of the other piece of double-sided tape and fold that zipper accent over and around that top raw edge of your pocket. And if you need to use clips to help, go ahead and do that. Sometimes double-sided tape doesn't stick very well to water-resistant canvas. Now if you have any overhang of your accent piece, you can just trim that down on the sides. And now with your pocket right side up, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch right along the bottom edge of that little accent at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and the end. So before we move forward, we want to mark the midpoint on the bottom folded edge of this pocket. But since it's a finished edge, you want to make sure you use a marking tool that will disappear. So this is the air erasing marker. So now grab your lower interior panel and lay it right side up. And you're gonna grab your slip pocket and lay it right side up. Make sure you have the midpoints on the bottom and the top edge of your main interior panel marked. And we're gonna measure up from the bottom 3 inches. And using the midpoint mark on our slip pocket, we're going to center it and keep it 3 inches above the bottom edge. And we're just going to tape that in place. Seem to be out of my paper tape, so use your masking tape or tape of choice. It's always a little tricky to tape these things down. So once you have this tape down, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the sides and the bottom, all at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have that stitched down, if you'd like to do the center pocket to divide this, we'll move forward with that. Now you can do a center pocket or you can put it off to the side. Maybe you want to put a Kindle on one side of this and have a pen pocket. So if you have an idea of how you want to use this, go grab those items and just see how much space they take up. So that way you can get your line drawn where you want it. But I'm just going to go straight in the center. So using my midpoint marks, I drew a vertical line going right across the pocket. Now, if you're going to be using rivets to put on the top of this pocket, then what you're going to do is you're going to start at the bottom of your pocket, top stitch up just to the stitching, to your top stitching that's on your accent, and then go back down, stopping where you started. And that's as far as you're going to go. However, if you're not using rivets, then you're going to start from the bottom of the line and you're going to go all the way up to the very top of your pocket accent, over it, and then back down. So if you're going to use rivets, we're going to attach a rivet over here, so we don't want any stitching there. If you're not using rivets, you can just go ahead and go all the way up and down. So I'm just using a top stitching length for that. So now I'm going to add 3 rivets to this pocket, 1 at the top of each corner. And when I do this, I'm going to make sure I'm not cutting into any top stitching. So it's going to be a little bit in from the corner. And then I'm going to have 1 in the very center as well. And remember, I did not top stitch over the center of that accent. So I'm going to grab my hole punch and I'm just going to punch out holes 3 places I marked. Adding rivets here is completely optional. It looks really nice and it does add some reinforcement, but I wouldn't say that it's necessary. I don't think these pockets get a ton of use that they would require a rivet, but it sure does look fancy. So once you have those holes punched, you can just pop in the rivets. If you're using really lightweight material here, you might want to grab a piece of stabilizer and just like a little 1-inch cut of stabilizer, just pop a hole in that and add that over the back before you add the cap on, just for a little bit of extra reinforcement. I feel like with the material I'm using, I should be okay. And once you have those rivets ready, just grab your press and press them in place. And there we go. How sweet is that little pocket? Isn't that cute? It's like a little extra work, but it sure is cute. Now, if you're doing the little cute add-ons, then you're going to attach one of these now. Mark 3.5 inches along the top edge from the top right corner. So top right corner, 3.5 inches in. Line up your little hook tab here, clip it on there, and just baste that on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now you can set this pocket to the side. So now we're going to do our zipper pocket. Now I would say that this is a required pocket because we use this when we're turning the bag out later. You don't have to, but I would suggest you do it this way. So grab your zipper accent of choice and your main lining panel. So your lining panel should have midpoint marks on the top and the bottom. And you should have 2 of your zipper interior lining pocket panels. Flip over your zipper accent to the wrong side and add some double-sided tape everywhere you need it. So I like to add it definitely along the long edges, not too close to any of the edges because we don't want to sew over it. And then if you have a really detailed accent, you might want to add a couple more pieces just where you feel like material might shift on its own. So take your zipper accent and decide which side is going to be the top side, and then mark a midpoint along that top side. So I'm just going to fold this in half just on the top edge. I'm going to use my air erasing marker because I don't need this to be seen forever, just for a little bit. Then you're going to measure 2.5 inches down from the top edge, and you're going to center your zipper accent window using the midpoint mark, and make sure it's level at 2.5 inches. Once you have it the way you want, you can take the paper off the top edge of your zipper accent and tape this down. So once I'm happy with the top edge, then I'll take the paper off the rest of the zipper accent and tape the whole thing in place. I just like to make sure it's as straight as possible first. And I am actually also going to add my little woven bag tag right at the bottom here. So if you're going to do something like this, make sure you tape that in place now, because we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the outside of our zipper accent design at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Be very careful with this. Go nice and slow. Only the outside, not the inner rectangle. Leave that unsewn. Backstitch at the beginning and the end, and I would suggest pulling the threads to the back of the lining panel when you're done for a clean finish. Alrighty, once you have this top stitched in place and you're happy with it, we're going to cut out this center part. So I'm just going to fold it in half, and I'm cutting the interior main panel, not the zipper accent, not the accent panel, just the interior main panel. I'm just going to cut right along the middle. I'm going to slide my scissors underneath that vinyl accent off the short edge so I can make sure I get all the way back there. Again, carefully not cutting the vinyl. Then we're going to flip this over to the back side and just kind of lift up that lining panel and start cutting it out of the window. So I just lift it away. You still have the tape there, so I leave it where it's taped down, but I just lift it up so it isn't close to the edge of my vinyl accent. So you see when you flip this over, you have a nice opening here. Isn't that cute? Okay, so this is aside for just a moment. I'm gonna take one of your interior zipper pockets and lay it right side up. If you haven't already attached the zipper pull to your zipper, go ahead and do that. And then take your zipper and lay it right side up and line it up with the top long edge and clip along that long edge. Remember, both units are right side up. And then we're going to sew along this top clipped edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So once you have it stitched in place, pull the interior panel up and away from the zipper and just finger press this down. If you're having a really hard time getting this flat, you could just top stitch right along the edge of the zipper tape at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just like this, to hold the panel flat. But I'm not going to do that. I don't feel like we really need to with this material. So I'm going to take my other zipper panel and lay it right side up. Take my zipper, lay it right side up so that the edge that doesn't have anything attached is at the top, and clip these edges together. And now stitch along this top clipped edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have that stitched in place, pull the lining panel away from the zipper so they're both spread away. And just flatten this out as best you can. And now with the zipper right side up, let's add some double-sided tape right along the very outer edge on each long side of our zipper tape. And now lay your zipper unit so that when the zipper closes, it closes towards the left. Grab your lining panel with the zipper cut out, and you're going to center this over the zipper tape. So make sure you lift up the sides and you have the same amount of overhang on each side. You should have plenty of room to do this. So get this centered over the zipper, make sure everything is nice and flat. Pull your zipper pull up through the window. So now I'm going to fold this down so I'm looking at the top of my zipper, and I'm just going to take the paper off the top edge of my double-sided tape. And then carefully fold this back down and tape this in place. That looks good. And now I'm going to flip up the bottom and remove the paper from the other piece of double-sided tape. Fold the lining panel back down and tape that bottom edge. There we go. And then just double check you have overhang on both sides. Nice. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch along the bottom edge of this rectangle only. So I'm gonna go a little off the side, like 1/8 of an inch past the short edges of that window on the bottom edge only. Make sure your lining panels are spread up and away from one another, just like they were when we attached all this together. Don't backstitch at the beginning and the end. Instead, leave the tails nice and long and tie them off on the back side after you're done stitching. So once you have that bottom edge stitched down, flip this over so we're looking at the back and pull down that top lining panel. So make it nice and flat. So now both of the lining panels for the zipper pocket are down on the bottom. Flip this back to the right side. And now we're gonna go back to the sewing machine and we're gonna start at the end of where our stitching is on the bottom edge of that rectangle, and we're gonna go up the short edge along the other long edge and then down the other short edge, connecting it with the other side of the top stitching that we've already done on the bottom edge. Leave the tails long and tie them off on the back as well. If you're confused about that, check the pattern. I do have instructions on how to do that. All right, isn't that a really clean and pretty look? So now we're gonna flip this to the back side, and you should notice that one of your pockets is a little bit longer than the other. I'm just gonna slide my scissors underneath them, and I'm going to trim down the longer pocket. Now make sure you're not trimming your main lining panel, just the zipper pocket panel. Now take that bottom edge of your pocket panel, both pieces, and fold them up by about 1/2 an inch. So both pieces are being folded up together. I'm not measuring it, I'm just eyeballing it. You want a generous fold though. And then add clips along the sides of your zipper pocket panel. So pull the main panel away from the zipper and just clip the raw edges of the sides on both sides. Now you're gonna flip your lining panel so it's right side up and then pull one side away. So the right side you can start with, and you're gonna stitch along just the side of the zipper lining panels at about a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the top and the bottom. You will stitch over the fold, but we're not gonna close the bottom edge. You're just gonna do this on the left and the right sides, not sewing the bottom long edge at all. Back stitch at the beginning and the end each time. And then once you have those sewn, you should have something like this. So let's open up the zipper, and if you reach in, your hand comes out the bottom. That's how it should be. So now on the sides here, we're going to just melt down the edge of our zipper tape so we don't have to worry about that fraying. And then if you're using these little tabs, you're going to attach the remaining one 3.5 inches on the top right corner. So 3.5 inches from the top right corner in. Just line up your tab there, and you can take this to the sewing machine and just baste that in place at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, your last pocket is now complete. Okay, so now we're going to build our lower lining. So to do that, you're gonna need both lower lining main panels, both lower lining side panels, and your lining base panel. On the lining base panel, mark a midpoint along all 4 edges, and then make sure you also have midpoint marks on the top and bottom of each side panel and the top and bottom of each main panel. So now let's prepare the base panel by flipping it so we're looking at the wrong side. Grab a ruler, and we're gonna mark little corner boxes just like we did with the exterior, but this time they're gonna be 1/2 an inch boxes. So 1/2 an inch in from the short edge, 1/2 an inch in from the long edge. Make a little box. Do this for all 4 corners. So once you have all 4 of those corners boxed, grab your lower lining main panel that has the slip pocket and lay it right side up. And then take your base panel and lay it right side down, lining up the bottom long edges right sides together. And now we're gonna sew along this bottom clipped edge at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, a little bit bigger than the exterior. But once again, we're not sewing off to the edges. You're gonna start and stop at those box corners. Those are your indicators of where you gotta start and stop. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have that sewn on, grab your interior main lining panel with the zipper and lay it right side up. And then take your unit with the base panel, spread it open, and lay the base panel right side down. matching up the bottom edges and clipping together, right sides together. So now for this edge, you're gonna wanna leave an opening that's centered. I suggest at least 8 inches. If you're using really thick material, you might wanna go bigger. So that's one thing some of my testers mentioned, was that they felt like birthing the bag was a little difficult because they used really heavy duty material. And since I'm using that foam, I'm gonna use a bigger one. I'm gonna use like an 11-inch opening. So very small amount is actually gonna be sewn over here. But that's okay, because I can clean this up later. It's okay to have a big opening here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start at one of my little corners of my drawn box, and I'm gonna backstitch. I'm gonna stitch to the first line at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, skip over the opening in the center, go to the next marked line, backstitch, sew to the corner that I marked, and backstitch there as well. A big opening is totally fine. We'll close it in the end. Okay, just double check that your zipper pocket's open on the bottom. There we go. Okay, all is good. So now set this to the side for just a minute while we prepare our side panels. Grab both of your lower lining side panels and you're going to lay them wrong side up. And then on the bottom corners of each one of these panels, you're gonna mark little 1/2 inch boxes just like you did on the base panel. So you're gonna do this for both bottom corners of both side panels. This is a 1/2 inch box. So now you just need one of them. Lay your lining panel with the slip pocket right side up and just move the rest of the bag out of the way. Grab the right side pocket and we're going to push the mesh in and flip this right sides together with the main lining panel and match this up corner to corner. And remember, you did not attach the base panel to the very edge, so you should be able to pull the base panel out of the way and get the bottom corner of your side panel to match up with the bottom corner of your main panel. Just add clips along this edge. And now for the side panels, we want to be a little bit more precise. On the top corner, by the top edge of the bag, we're going to start at a 3/8 inch seam allowance and we're going to backstitch. As we go down the side, we're going to increase our seam allowance to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then once we get to the bottom box corner where we marked, we're going to stop there, backstitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're not going all the way to the bottom edge, remember that. Isn't this looking pretty when you pull it apart like that? It's such a pretty inside. Okay, so now let's repeat that for the left side panel. So take your left side panel and lay it right side down, right sides together with the left side of your interior main panel with the slip pocket. And line this up corner to corner, pulling the base panel out of the way. And then once again, we're going to sew along the top edge of the side panel at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, the bottom side at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you start or stop at that box corner on the bottom of your side panel, backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, once you have both the side panels attached to one of the main panels, now we're going to attach them to the other ones. So I'm just gonna pull up the main lower lining panel that has the zipper, and I'm gonna pull that right sides together with the right side panel. And I'm just going to line them up corner to corner. And I'm going to flip this over so I'm looking at the back of my side panel because that's where I have my marking. And I'm going to make sure I'm sewing at a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the bottom and a 3/8 inch seam allowance at the very top, back stitching at the beginning and the end, and making sure I don't go past that corner of my boxed bottom marking. Okay, we have that side done. Once you have both of the long edges done, now we're going to do the bottom, so you can just kind of reach your fingers into the bottom and straighten this out. It should be pretty simple. And you should find sewing this much easier than sewing the exterior. No matter what material you're using for the exterior, the lining should be quite a bit easier. So once you have that done, you can sew from either the bottom of the base panel or the back side of the side panel. They both have the markings on it, so whatever is easier. And we're going to stitch along the short edge at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, starting and stopping at those box marks. You should notice that your stitching is meeting up with stitching that you've already done on the sides. All right, there we go. One side is completely done. We're gonna repeat that on the other side. So I'm gonna take my lining panel that has a zipper pocket and lay it right side together with the side panel, pushing the mesh out of the way in case it's starting to fold out, and just clip these right sides together, corner to corner. And then with the side panel wrong side up so you can see your marked bottom corner, you're going to stitch along this edge, 3/8 inch seam allowance at the top, 1/2 inch seam allowance at the bottom, back stitch at the beginning and the end, and stop at that box corner. All right, and finally, just push your fingers into that bottom edge, get it nice and flat, and clip along that short edge right there. And then we'll just sew along this edge at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, going from corner to corner of our little boxes, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, the bottom of your bag is now done. Reach inside and poke each corner to make sure your finger doesn't go through any of them. That looks good. I am going to trim down the seam allowance along outside the base panel. I'm just going to trim it in half. So I'm going to trim it along the edge where there's stitching. Where there's an opening, I'm not trimming the seam allowance. That's very, very important. So along this long edge here where there's no opening, I can trim it down. Along the short edges, I can trim it down. So see, when I go along the edge over here, I'm not going to trim down that seam allowance. So I'm just going to trim a little bit on the side, but where my mark is for the opening, don't trim that down. You need that to stay the same. So just be careful about that. And I'm going to leave the seam allowances on the sides untrimmed. You can trim them down if you'd like, but I don't think they cause a problem. So now we're going to attach the main zipper to this bottom lining. So you need to start thinking about how you want this to be in the end. I like the zipper pocket to go against the back panel. And if you haven't already, let's just open up that zipper pocket so it's halfway open. I like the zipper pocket to go against the back panel. I like my main zipper to close going towards the left. So my zipper panel is going to be up like this. This is the exterior right side. And it's just going to plop right inside the lining like this. So if you want the zipper accent pocket along the back panel, make sure that's where it is right now. I'm going to take the lower interior panel, right side up, that has the zipper accent. I'm going to match up these midpoints. So both of them are right side up. One is lining right side up and the other is exterior right side up. And I'm going to carefully clip along this entire edge. Now, your main zipper should not go all the way to the seam. It's going to get close to the seam between the side and the main panel, but it's not going to go all the way there. So once you have this clipped onto the lower lining of your bag, we're going to baste along this clipped edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you have that side basted on, let's switch this around. So now I have the interior panel with the slip pocket, interior right side up. I'm going to take my main zipper, exterior right side up, line these up, long edges together, match up the midpoints first, clip those together, and then just clip along this entire long edge. And then once you have that clipped in place, just baste along that clipped edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so this is your interior lower panel. So you open it up. All your pockets. Okay, set this to the side for just a moment. So now we're going to build the interior top. Now this is just a little strip that goes along the top that separates the zipper from being too high up on the bag. So you're going to take both of your interior top panels and mark the midpoints along the top and bottom edges of both long edges. And then we're just going to take these and lay them right sides together. And we're going to be focused on the short edges. So line up your short edges and clip these right sides together on both sides. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along both short edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So once you have those sides stitched, now we want to spread those seams open. So use your fingers to give it a good flat spread, just like that. If you have material you can use an iron-on, you can do that. You can use tape. I feel like just using your fingers is fine for here. And now what I suggest you do is take this to the sewing machine and top stitch along both sides of that seam with the seam spread open, and that's going to hold those edges back so it stays flat. Do this for both sides. All right, now it's a little hard to see, but if you have any of these little dog ears, you can trim those down so it's just nice and smooth. Now we need to attach the top to the bottom of the interior. Now the whole point of this was to try to keep the top seams limited in bulk. It gets tricky in the very end. So what we're going to do is make sure you have your midpoints marked along the long edges of your interior bottom and also along the top of the side panels for the interior bottom. And then make sure you have your midpoints marked on the long edges, and then we have our seams that are going to serve as midpoints as well. So the interior top does have a top in the bottom, so if you were to lay it out with the seams on the side, you see how it kind of veers up. The longer edge is the top, so try to remember that. Let's just mark the top edge with a T so we know that's the top. So you're gonna take your interior top and fold it so it's right side out, and we're gonna insert this into the interior lower panel. Now let's start with the side panel. So the bottom of the interior top is going to line up with the top edge of our interior lower. It's a little complicated. Bottom of the top piece is going to be sewn to the top of the bottom piece, right? That should make sense. So take one of the seams for your top piece and right side together, line it up with the midpoint along the side panel of your lower bottom and clip these together. And then do the same thing on the other side. Make sure this doesn't get all tangled up. So remember, these panels are right sides together. And then the midpoint along the bottom edge of your top piece is going to line up with the midpoint along the top edge of your lower piece and clip these together. Do this on both sides. Then once you have those 4 midpoints all lined up, then just continue clipping along the entire edge. When you get to the seams over here between the main and side panels for the lower, I suggest spreading those seams open with your finger. It shouldn't really add any bulk or anything. It just has a neater finish if it's spread flat. All right, once you have the lower and top pieces clipped along their top edge, right sides together, we're gonna sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Go slow here. Use a stiletto. I like to use a zipper foot. Make sure your seams stay open as best as possible and backstitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have this top piece sewn on, you got to think about how you want this bag to be in the end. Because what we want to do is we want to press the top piece up and away from the bottom, obviously. But which way you want to top stitch it is going to kind of determine how things lay later. So for example, if you push the seam behind the top panel, and we top stitch on the top panel side, that's going to kind of push down this zipper panel more. So it's gonna kind of cover the top of your slip pocket. It's just gonna push everything down more, which is the look I like personally. I like it to kind of be pushed down and open like this. However, you could also take the entire seam and flip it behind the lining bottom panel, and you could top stitch it like that, which means in the end, your zipper is going to lay more upright like this. But you have to remember also, if you have these small tabs over here, these are gonna go in the direction of the seam as well. So if this zipper panel goes up, this will go up and it kind of sticks up like that, which is not the look I like. So personally, I like to push the seam behind the top panel, and I'm just going to finger press this around the entire top edge. It can get a little bulky in some places, but it shouldn't be too bad. This is why we have this top panel here, because it helps. And then once you have that seam pressed the way you want it, we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch along the top panel with the seam behind it at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just going slow with a zipper foot. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. If you choose to push the seam behind the lining panel and top stitch on the lining panel side, that's fine too. So once you have the interior top panel top stitched however you'd like, make sure you open the main zipper all the way. Now take the inner part of your bag with it wrong side out, right side on the inside, and your exterior part of your bag, exterior right side out. And then you're gonna insert the exterior into the interior. Now, make sure you have this set up the way you want. So for example, I want my back panel of my exterior to go up against the interior panel that has the zipper pocket. So when I insert this in there, I'm gonna make sure that's where it is. Now your interior is a little bit smaller than your exterior, so you are gonna have to really shove it in there. Make sure you have your main zipper panel facing down, and you're going to take the top edge of that top inner panel, and you're going to line it up right sides together with the top edge of your exterior panel. Also, make sure your rectangle rings are facing down. We don't want to sew over those. Match up the top of these panels right sides together and align their midpoint marks and clip them together. So start with the midpoint marks along the top edge of each main panel. If your zipper pocket flips up, make sure you flip that down. You don't want to accidentally sew over that. Always double checking your rectangle rings are going down. And then once again, match up the midpoint marks and clip together. Okay, once you have the midpoints clipped, then we're gonna go over to the side. Let's see if I can get this in the shot. Now, the seam on the top of the inner panel is going to line up with the midpoint mark on the top of the exterior side panel. So line those up right sides together. And then as we go towards the side over here, I suggest you press the seam open that connects the exterior front and side panels, or back and side panels. Just the main and side panels, press that seam open. It's gonna make it easier. And honestly, if you wanted to baste this seam open ahead of time, you can. I probably should have done that with this material because it's so thick. But that's always an option. You can just take this to the sewing machine, press open the seam, look at it from the back, and just right at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just baste over it to keep it open. And that's gonna make the step of sewing it to the interior much easier. But I'm just gonna risk it and use my fingers. So I'm gonna do this on the other side as well, and then just go around the entire top edge, clipping these two panels right sides together. I can already tell this is gonna be a battle at my sewing machine because of that foam in here. The foam and the vinyl combo are gonna be a little tricky at the machine. All right, once you have the entire top edge of these two panels clipped and they're right sides together exactly how you want them lined up, we're gonna sew along this top edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. If you're using thick material and you're worried about that stitching kind of being a little like seen in the end, you could do another row of stitching just at a 1/4 inch seam allowance to kind of reinforce those stitches. I think I will do that today. When I sew this, I'm gonna sew it from the inside of the bag. So I'm not taking off my table or anything like that. I'm just gonna sew from the inside of the bag. Just go really slow. I mean, really slow. Be careful. This bag, it's not difficult to sew. It's just, it's so big that it's hard to hold. So take your time here. Okay, once you have that stitched down, now we're going to turn this right side out. So take that large opening that you have in your main lining, and you're going to gently pull your bag through that. So I think making it a little bit bigger, making it more on the 11-inch side actually works really well for this thick material. But you still have to be careful and really smush your bag through there. Don't try to keep your bag, you know, in its perfect shape. You're gonna have to smush it. So now I'm gonna top stitch the top for my next step. I know some people like to close the lining first. I always like to top stitch first. So what you wanna do is make sure your lining is completely turned out and then tuck your lining inside the bag. This is a big bag. Now, remember, the top of your bag is not the seam that's between the inner part and the zipper. That goes down in the bag. The top of your bag is the seam you just stitched. It does not have top stitching yet. So you're gonna have to roll it down and smooth it out, which can be a little tricky. So I'm just going to carefully go around top edge here, and I can put my hand inside the lining and kind of use my fingers to push out that seam from the inside. And then I'm gonna use clips to hold the seam in place. And when you come up to the seams, like with the side seam between the exterior side and the front panel, that's gonna be a little bit bulky, but as long as you kept it open, it should be not too bad. And the difficulty of top stitching this top seam really just depends on the type of material you chose to use, on the stabilizer you chose to use. I'm trying to show what I would consider the most challenging, which is a medium to thicker weight material like vinyl, and then foam interfacing. Because foam interfacing isn't very dense, but it is poofy, you know, it takes up a lot of space, mostly it's air, but it's still, that can be a challenge at a sewing machine. So I'm trying to give you tips to help with that. So doing that second row of stitching that I did when I was attaching these, that also helped to smush down more of the foam that was in the seam to make it flatter and easier to top stitch. Okay, this part can be tricky. We need to top stitch around the top edge of the bag. I'm gonna top stitch at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you're more comfortable doing it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, that's fine too. I'm going to top stitch on the top side of the exterior, so on the right side of the exterior. So for that, I'm going to take the table off of my sewing machine so I can kind of wrap the bag around the arm of my sewing machine. You can top stitch from the top of this with the bag down on top of a table. It's going to be more of a struggle, which means your top stitching can be a little wonky. You can also top stitch from the inside of the bag if that's easier for you. Just note that your bobbin thread is what's going to be seen on the outside. So if you want to change that bobbin thread to a color that matches your material, now's the time to do that. I'm going to start at one of the side seams. I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and the end. Go slow. Just be very, very careful with this. Constantly take times to pinch down your material if it's thick. And at this point, if you're using thick material, you might want to increase your needle size. I think I actually am. I'm going to switch out my needle to a 90-14. Okay, so that part can be pretty tricky depending on your material. I will say that was probably the hardest top stitching I've done on the Wish Tote yet, just because the material is so thick. But once you get through that, you're going to reach in to your zipper pocket that's in the lining. And remember, you have a hole in the bottom of there. You're going to pull that lining pocket out and then reach through, and you see how we have this big hole in the main part of the lining? Pull the bottom of the main interior up through that hole in the zipper pocket. I know this is a little weird, but this is how we're going to give a clean finish to the bottom. So get as much as you can up through that hole in that zipper pocket, And then you can find the midpoints on the bottom of your interior main panels and line them up right sides together, clip along that edge, and then clip along that entire opening. So remember, this is the opening on the bottom of the interior main panels. So the main panel and the base panel. So mine's a very big opening, so I gotta make sure I pull it all out. And then once you have this clipped, you can take this to the sewing machine and just sew along that clipped opening at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So if you had previously trimmed down the seam allowance along the interior panel, you can trim down the seam allowance in half along where you just stitched. This is optional though, you could just leave it. Okay, now insert the lining back into the bag through that zipper pocket. So now when you look inside the bag, your lining hole should be completely unnoticeable. Now we want to close the hole on that zipper pocket. So pull the zipper pocket up, and because we folded over the edges on the bottom, you should note you can just kind of tug your fingers in here, and the raw edges of the bottom of the zipper pocket just kind of tuck in on themselves. So let them do that, fold them down, and clip along the bottom folded edge to make sure those raw edges are completely tucked inside on the wrong side of the material. If it's not exactly a 1/2 inch along the entire edge, that's perfectly fine. And once you have this prepped, you can take this to the sewing machine and just top stitch along this bottom edge at a 1/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have that hole closed up, you can insert your zipper pocket lining into the zipper. And now the bag portion is done. All we have to do is finish up the handles. So push out your lining, make sure everything is tucked in where you want it. You can see you should be able to close the zipper completely. And it's hard to get it in this shot, but it's nice and flat. Isn't that beautiful? It's a big bag. It's a really big bag. You gotta put in the work for it, but I mean, I feel like it's worth it. It's pretty cool. All right, let's work on those handles now. All right, so now let's work on these handles. So I like to add a little accent of vinyl around the ends of the handles just to give it a neat finish. You could also use metal hardware for this. Whatever you have on hand is gonna work. I don't have 1.5 inch wide strap-in metal hardware, so I'm just gonna use vinyl. So with webbing, I always like to melt down the edges of it because it does fray. And now if you're using a cotton webbing, then I would use some sort of a fray check or a glue or something like that along the edges because melting it with the lighter is not gonna do any good. So now I'm gonna take my little square piece of vinyl and I'm just gonna fold it in half and wrap it around the edge. You can mark a midpoint if you'd like. You can glue this and tape it if you'd like. I'm just gonna wrap it around and clip it in place. Just make sure that the edges line up on both sides because when we top stitch this down, it's important that we catch both edges. So wrap one of these strap ends around each end of each handle. So now I'm gonna take these to the sewing machine and you can top stitch a rectangle around all the edges of each strap end at an 1/8 inch seam allowance to make a little box. That would give a lot of reinforcement. I'm actually only gonna top stitch right along the raw edge towards the inner part of the handle at an 1/8 inch seam allowance, but I will back stitch at the beginning and the end on each strap end just to secure this in place. After you have those top stitched, if you have any like little pigtail pieces of thread on the sides, I suggest grabbing a lighter and melting those down just so it looks a little more finished. Now I'm going to use rivets to install the handles. So what we want to do is we want to grab one handle and I'm going to grab my front panel here. And all we have to do is wrap the handle around the top part of our rectangle ring. So I'm going to go from the top down, making sure the top stitching is what I see as I insert this and wrap it around. I can flip this down to look better. And I'm just gonna wrap it around so that the strap end just comes down to the bottom. So let's see how far this is. So this looks like it's about 1 inch. So I'm just wrapping it around by about 1 inch. I'm gonna grab a clip to hold it in place. Once again, I'm gonna grab my little tool here to help me evenly space out my rivets. I'm going to lay it right over the edge of my tab fold over, lining up the top long edge of the tool with the top stitching so my rivets aren't too close to the stitching. And then I'll just mark little dots where I'm going to install my rivet. Then I'll grab my hole punch and I'll just punch through the strap end and the webbing, fold it over together. And as I punch out one hole, I like to put a rivet in there right away because these things, they can be a little slippery. And I don't want to fight this. So I'll put one in there, turn my bag so I can have easier access to this. And then I'll punch out the other hole and insert the rivet there. So you see when the strap is down, you see the tab, but when the strap is up, you don't. You just see the webbing. So keeping the strap straight, pull the other end of the webbing, and we're gonna go once again down from the top, in and around the rectangle ring, then flip the entire handle down. Do the same thing at a 1-inch overhang. Mark placement for your rivets, and then punch out those holes using those placement marks and add your rivets. Okay, take a look at your handle, make sure it's not twisted, make sure it looks just like you want it to look. And once you're happy with it, grab your rivet press and press these in place. And now you don't have to use rivets on this step. You could sew these handles in place. It will be a little challenging because it is so close to the bag. So getting this under the machine to stitch it in place will be a little bit of a challenge, but you can do it. All right, and that's how you attach the handle. So just repeat that process exactly for the other side. And there you go. Straps are done. The handles are done. Your bag is done. How beautiful is that? It's a nautical bag, isn't it? All right, guys. I think we did it. I think we nailed the nautical theme, right? Does this look like a boat bag? Does it look like a cruising bag? I feel like we did. I wanted it to be more neutral because this is for Bobby, and she's not like super in your face bright like I am. But I still want it to be something that's like, that bag should be on a boat. And I think we did a good job. And I got to add a little bit of my fun to the top here and inside the bag, which inside the bag is so fun. Look at that. That's bright. And yellow is Bobby's favorite color, so I always like to add accents of yellow to her bags. So I hope you love making this bag. I hope you enjoy the pattern. Like I said, if you make it and you share it on social media, please make sure you tag me. I want to see your version. Let me know what kind of materials you're using. Let me know how you're changing the pockets around. Did you do the mesh pockets? Did you change it to like a water bottle holder? Let me know. And especially if you add some sort of detailing to these front panels like I did with the applique, I want to see that. This is a pieced panel, which I think worked out really well. Let me see what you're doing. Thank you so much for sewing with me today. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.